The alarm bells rang through Earth's Naval Command Center with a sound that made everyone freeze. Admiral Jack Morrison looked up from his morning coffee as the red lights flashed across the control room. In his 30 years of military service, he had never heard the deep space emergency signal before. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from outside the solar system," called Captain Lisa Stone from her station. Her fingers moved quickly across the holographic display as data streamed in from the deep space listening posts. "It's coming from the Zilani Republic." Morrison felt his stomach drop. The Zilani had been humanity's first contact with friendly alien life 5 years ago. The plant-like beings had shared their amazing farming technology with Earth, helping to feed billions of hungry people. In return, humans had promised to help protect them if they ever faced danger. "Put it through the main screen," Morrison ordered as he stood up. Officers throughout the command center stopped their work and turned to watch. The image that appeared made everyone gasp. On the screen was Ambassador Kyla Resch, a tall Zilani with bark-like skin and leaves that usually glowed bright green with health. Now those leaves were brown and wilted. Behind him, smoke filled the air, and explosions could be heard in the distance. "People of Earth," Kyla Resch spoke in his slow, careful way, "we call upon our friendship in our darkest hour. The Korath Empire has invaded our space. They destroy everything they touch. Our outer worlds are already gone. Our home world of Verdania will fall within 3 of your days unless help comes." The transmission cut to scenes that made Morrison clench his fists. Korath warships, dark and covered in weapons, fired upon peaceful Zilani cities. The beautiful forest cities that the Zilani had built burned as gray alien soldiers marched through the ruins. Children ran through the streets while their parents tried to shield them from the destruction. "The Korath believe we are weak because we choose peace over war," Kyla Resch continued. "They say all plant-based life forms are nothing more than weeds to be pulled from the galaxy. They will not stop with us. Any species they see as weak will face the same fate." Morrison watched as Korath soldiers destroyed a Zilani hospital, their weapons turning the healing plants inside to ash. The Admiral had seen war before, but this was something different. This was the total destruction of a peaceful people who had never harmed anyone. "We know humans have a strong military," the Zilani ambassador said. "We have seen your history, your wars, your ability to fight when pushed. We do not ask lightly. But if you can help us, please come quickly. Time runs short." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in complete silence. Morrison looked around at his officers. Some stared at the blank screen in shock. Others were already pulling up star charts and fleet positions. Dr. Paul Grant, the science advisor who had helped establish first contact with the Zilani, spoke first. "Admiral, the Zilani saved millions of lives on Earth with their crop technology. Without their help, the food crisis would have killed countless people." "I know that, Doctor," Morrison replied. He was already thinking about what it would take to mount a rescue mission. "Captain Stone, what do we know about this Korath Empire?" Lisa Stone pulled up files on her screen. "Intelligence reports show they're a warrior culture from the far side of Zilani space. They've conquered 6 other star systems in the past 10 years. They use overwhelming force and terror tactics. Their military technology is advanced, but they've never fought humans before." Morrison nodded. "What about our fleet strength?" "We have the largest space navy in human history," Stone answered. 12 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, 6 carriers, and support ships, all based on Mars and Luna. But, sir, this would be our first major engagement with a hostile alien force." The Admiral walked to the large window that showed Earth spinning slowly below. Somewhere down there, children were eating food grown with Zilani technology. Families were alive because the gentle plant beings had shared their knowledge freely. asking for nothing in return except friendship. "Get me President Shun on the secure line," Morrison ordered, "and start pulling together the fleet commanders for an emergency meeting." 20 minutes later, Morrison found himself in a video call with the President of Earth, the leaders of the other major nations, and the top military commanders. The debate was intense. "This could start an interstellar war," warned General Martinez. "From Luna Base. We'd be fighting an enemy we know almost nothing about, in space that's weeks away from home." "The Zelani are peaceful," added Admiral Zhang from the Pacific Fleet. "They don't have the military knowledge to help us plan this operation. We'd be going in almost blind." President Shun looked tired as she spoke. "Admiral Morrison, give me your honest assessment. Can we win this?" Morrison thought about the question carefully. "Madam President, the Korath have numbers and experience, but they've never fought humans. They expect their enemies to fight the same way they do, big ships in straight lines, following the rules of traditional space combat. Humans don't follow rules when people we care about are in danger." Dr. Grant leaned forward. "The Zelani taught us how to grow food in places we thought were impossible. They shared their most precious knowledge because they believed in friendship between species. How can we not help them now?" The room went quiet as everyone considered the choice. Morrison knew that whatever they decided would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. President Shun finally spoke. "The Zelani helped us when we needed it most. They trusted us with technology that could have been used as a weapon, but they gave it freely to save lives. Admiral Morrison, you have authorization to deploy whatever forces you think necessary. Bring our friends home." Morrison felt a mix of pride and worry as he saluted. "Yes, Madam President, we'll bring them home." As the call ended, Morrison turned to his staff. The real work was about to begin. They had less than 72 hours to assemble the largest human battle fleet ever created and travel across the galaxy to face an enemy that had never known defeat. "Captain Stone, send word to all fleet commanders. Full mobilization. We leave for Zelani space in 18 hours. Morrison looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them, their friends were fighting for their lives. "And get me everything we have on Korath military tactics. If we're going to war, we're going to win." The Mars orbital shipyards had never seen activity like this before. Hundreds of ships moved through space around the red planet as Earth's greatest fleet came together. Captain Ben Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching his warship after warship took position in the growing formation. "Impressive sight, isn't it, sir?" said Commander Amy Ross as she joined him at the observation window. The Liberty was the newest and largest ship in the human fleet, built to serve as a mobile command center for major operations. "Impressive and terrifying," Hayes replied. 12 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, 6 carriers, and 40 support ships. The most powerful force humanity has ever put together, and we're taking it into the unknown. Hayes had commanded ships for 15 years, including during the Yasai Titan Rebellion, when mining colonies tried to break away from Earth. That had been brutal fighting, but at least he knew his enemy then. The Korath were a complete mystery, except for the destruction they left behind, docked down in the ship's hangar bay. Lieutenant Colonel Pete Davis was checking his Marines one final time. 3,000 of Earth's finest soldiers were spread across the fleet, ready for whatever ground fighting might come. Davis had served in conflicts on 6 different worlds, but never against aliens. "Listen up," Davis told his officers as they gathered around a holographic display. "We don't know what Korath soldiers look like or how they fight, but we know they're bullies who attack peaceful people. Marines don't like bullies." The men and women under his command nodded grimly. They had all seen the footage from Zelani worlds. Cities burned to ash, families running from gray-armored soldiers, entire forests destroyed just to cause fear. It made every human angry in a way that was hard to put into words. "Sir, incoming message from Admiral Morrison," announced the communications officer. Hayes walked back to his command chair as the Admiral's face appeared on the main screen. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, aboard the flagship Endeavour. We depart for Zelani space in 2 hours. Our destination is 47 light-years away, which means a journey of 8 days through jump space. But first, we must pass through the Void Nebula." Hayes felt his stomach tighten. Every spacer knew about the Void Nebula, a massive cloud of charged particles and electromagnetic storms that sat between human space and the rest of the galaxy. Most alien races avoided it completely because it made their navigation systems go crazy. "The nebula will test us before we even reach the war zone," Morrison continued. "Sensor range will drop to almost nothing. Communications will be spotty. Navigation will be nearly impossible using standard methods. But humans learned to sail on Earth's oceans during storms. We learned to fly through hurricanes and blizzards. A little space weather won't stop us." The transmission ended, and Hayes turned to his navigation officer. "What do you think, Lieutenant Cole? Can we handle the nebula?" Lieutenant Sarah Cole had grown up on a fishing boat in the North Atlantic before joining the Space Navy. She understood dangerous weather better than most. "Sir, I've studied the nebula patterns. It's chaotic, but there are patterns if you know how to look. Earth storms taught us to read the signs. I think we can do this." 2 hours later, the human fleet began its journey. The ships moved away from Mars in perfect formation, their engines creating streams of blue light against the darkness of space. It was a sight that made everyone who saw it feel proud to be human. But the real test came when they reached the edge of the Void Nebula. The massive cloud stretched across space like a wall of swirling colors. Purple, green, and gold lights dancing through clouds of cosmic dust. Energy discharges flickered between the particles like lightning in a storm. "All ships maintain close formation," ordered Admiral Morrison over the fleet communications. "Follow the Liberty's lead. Trust your instruments, but trust your instincts more." As they entered the nebula, Hayes watched his screens flicker and jump. The sensors that usually showed clear images of space now displayed random static. Radio messages became broken and hard to understand. Even the ship's artificial gravity seemed to wobble slightly. "This is worse than flying through a thunderstorm," muttered Commander Ross, as she tried to keep track of the other ships around them. But Lieutenant Cole smiled as she worked at her navigation station. "No, sir, it's exactly like flying through a thunderstorm. You have to feel your way through when you can't see clearly. Watch the energy patterns, not just the instruments." She was right. The human pilots, trained in Earth's chaotic weather and difficult flying conditions, began to adapt to the nebula's strange behavior. They learned to read the energy flows like wind currents, to navigate by the way the cosmic dust moved through the storms. Other ships in the fleet started, following the Liberty's path through the most dangerous areas. Captain Hayes found himself thinking about his grandfather, who had flown supply missions through typhoons in the Pacific Ocean during the old wars. The skills passed down through generations of human pilots were serving them well in the depths of space. "Contact on sensors," called out the tactical officer. "Unknown ship, bearing 270. On the screen, a sleek alien vessel appeared through the swirling clouds. It was clearly in distress, drifting without power as electrical storms raged around it. "It's a Zelani courier ship," announced Commander Ross after checking the identification signals. "They're alive, but their engines are dead." Hayes didn't hesitate. "Deploy rescue shuttles. Get them aboard." 20 minutes later, 3 Zelani survivors were brought to the Liberty's medical bay. They were weak and frightened, their plant-like skin showing signs of radiation exposure from the nebula's energy storms. "Thank you," whispered the senior Zilani officer as Dr. Helen Webb treated his injuries. "We have been drifting for days. Our ship could not handle the storm currents. How do humans navigate such chaos?" Dr. Webb smiled as she worked. "We've had lots of practice. Earth is a chaotic place. Storms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. It taught us to adapt to anything." The Zilani officer looked amazed. "Perhaps that is why the universe brought our species together. You thrive in chaos while we create harmony. Together, we are stronger than either could be alone." As the fleet continued through the nebula, word spread about the rescue. Human crews worked harder, knowing they were already saving lives. The Zilani survivors provided updated information about Korath positions and tactics, intelligence that would prove valuable in the battles ahead. On the 7th day, they emerged from the Void Nebula into clear space. Behind them, the cosmic storm continued to rage. Ahead lay Zilani territory, and the war that would test everything humanity had learned about fighting together. "All ships, report ready for combat operations," announced Commander Ross. Captain Hayes looked at the stars ahead, knowing that somewhere among them, their friends were still fighting for survival. "Signal the fleet. We're going to war." The human fleet dropped out of jump space at the edge of Zilani territory and immediately knew they were too late to stop the destruction. Captain Sue Kim stared at her screens aboard the USS Ranger in complete shock. Where beautiful green worlds should have been, only gray dead rocks remained. "My God," whispered her communications officer. "What did they do to these planets?" The answer came from the sensor readings. The Korath had stripped away every bit of plant life from 3 entire worlds. No trees, no grass, no flowers, nothing green remained alive. The planets looked like they had been burned with acid from space. "Captain, I'm picking up multiple contacts," called out Lieutenant Tony Blake from the fighter squadron ready room. "Looks like civilian ships running from the inner system." On the main screen, a heartbreaking sight appeared. Dozens of Zilani transport ships limped through space, many of them damaged and leaking air. These were not military vessels, but simple cargo haulers and passenger ships pressed into service as evacuation craft. They carried the survivors of worlds that no longer existed. "All ships, split formation," ordered Admiral Morrison over the fleet communications. "Cruiser groups 1 and 2 will escort the refugees to safety. The rest of us push forward to Verdania. We may not be able to save the outer worlds, but we can still save their home." Captain Kim felt her heart break as the Ranger moved closer to the refugee convoy. Through the ship's cameras, she could see Zilani families pressed against the windows of their transport ships. Children who had never known fear now huddled against their parents while their elders tried to stay strong. "This is Captain Kim of the human vessel Ranger," she broadcast to the refugee ships. "We are here to help. Follow our ships to safety." The response came from the lead transport, and the voice that answered made Kim want to cry. It was weak and filled with pain, but there was hope in it too. "Human ships, this is Ambassador Thurin Ka of the Zilani Republic. We did not think anyone would come. The Korath told us that no species would risk war to help plant-eaters like us." Kim had met Thurin Ka during the first contact ceremonies 5 years ago. He had been young then, his leaves bright green and his voice full of joy as he shared his people's farming secrets with Earth. Now he sounded old and tired, like someone who had seen too much death. "Ambassador, we keep our promises," Kim replied firmly. "Humans don't abandon their friends. We're going to get you somewhere safe. And then we're going to make the Korath pay for what they've done." As the human escorts formed up around the refugee convoy, Kim ordered her medical team to beam over to the most damaged Zilani ships. What Dr. Linda Hayes found there made her radio back with barely controlled anger. "Captain, you need to see." "This," Dr. Hayes said over the comm. "The Korath didn't just attack military targets. They specifically targeted hospitals, schools, and nurseries. They wanted to kill the children first." Kim closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her 15 years as a naval officer, she had seen combat against pirates and rebels, but this was different. This was not war. It was genocide. "Doctor, do what you can for the wounded. We'll be reaching the safe zone in 6 hours." While the medical teams worked to save Zelani lives, Ambassador Thuren Ka provided crucial intelligence about their enemy. He was brought aboard the Ranger, and what he told the human officers changed everything they thought they knew about the war. "The Korath do not fight for territory or resources," Thuren Ka explained as he sat in the ship's briefing room. His bark-like skin was scarred, and several of his leaves had been burned away. But his eyes still held the gentle wisdom that had made humans trust his people from the first meeting. "They fight because they believe that only warrior species deserve to exist. They call us the weak growth and say we poison the galaxy with our peaceful ways. They want to kill every plant-based life form they can find." Commander Amy Ross, who had transferred from the Liberty to help coordinate the rescue, leaned forward. "What about their military tactics? How do they fight?" "They use massive ships with overwhelming firepower," Thuren Ka replied. "Their strategy is always the same. Appear in huge numbers, destroy everything quickly, and move on. They believe that fear will make other species surrender without fighting." "Have they ever faced real resistance?" asked Kim. The Zelani ambassador shook his head sadly. "The 6 species they conquered before us either fled their home worlds or surrendered immediately. The Korath have never fought anyone who fought back effectively. They expect their enemies to either run away or stand still and die." This information was immediately relayed to Admiral Morrison aboard the flagship. The human fleet was still outnumbered, but now they had something valuable, the knowledge that their enemy had never adapted to unexpected tactics. As they escorted the refugees toward the safe zone, more disturbing reports came in. The Korath were not just destroying Zelani worlds. They were making videos of the destruction and broadcasting them to other species throughout the galaxy. The message was clear. This is what happens to anyone who opposes the Korath Empire. They're trying to terrorize the entire galaxy into submission, observed Lieutenant Blake after watching one of the intercepted broadcasts. They want everyone to be so afraid that they'll surrender without a fight. Dr. Hayes finished treating the last of the wounded Zelani children and joined the discussion. "Captain, I've been talking to the survivors. The Korath soldiers don't just kill quickly. They make it slow and painful. They want others to see the suffering. It's psychological warfare on a galactic scale." Kim felt something cold and hard forming in her chest. She had joined the Navy to protect people, and now she was seeing what happened when no one could protect the innocent. The images of burned Zelani cities and terrified children would stay with her forever. "They made one mistake," Kim said quietly. "They hurt our friends." As the refugee convoy reached the safety of human patrol space, Kim received new orders. The main fleet was approaching Verdania, where the final battle for the Zelani home world was about to begin. The Korath had built a massive fortress around Verdania's moon and were using it to bombard the planet below. "All ships prepare for combat operations," came Admiral Morrison's voice over the communications. "We're going to show the Korath what happens when they mess with Earth's allies. They wanted a war with the warrior species. Now they're going to get one." Kim looked out at the stars ahead, knowing that somewhere among them, the last free Zelani were fighting for their lives on their dying world. The human fleet had arrived just in time, but the real test was still ahead. The Korath had never faced humans in battle before. They were about to learn why. That was a very dangerous oversight. The human fleet arrived at Verdania to find a nightmare. The beautiful green world that had been the heart of Zelani civilization was now brown and dying. Massive orbital guns on the moon fired down at the planet every few minutes, turning forests into ash and cities into craters. "Look at the size of that thing," breathed Commander Amy Ross as she stared at the enemy fortress. The Koreth had built their weapon platform into Verdania's moon itself, covering the surface with armor plating and gun batteries. It was like a metal planet designed for nothing but destruction. Admiral Morrison studied the tactical display. From his flagship, the fortress had over 200 heavy weapons pointed at the planet below, plus another 100 facing outward to defend against any rescue attempt. Worse yet, the Koreth fleet of 60 warships patrolled the space around. A direct assault would be suicide, said Captain Ben Hayes during the emergency strategy meeting. They have us outnumbered and outgunned. Their position is too strong. But Major Kate Ford had a different idea. She stood at the briefing table, looking at the holographic display of the enemy fortress. Ford commanded the fleet's special operations. Teams, soldiers trained for the most dangerous missions behind enemy lines. "Sir, what if we don't attack the fortress directly?" she asked. "Every defensive position has a weak point. We just need to find it." She pointed to the sensor readings from the moon base. "Look at these energy patterns. The fortress uses massive shield generators to protect itself. But shields need power, and power needs cooling systems. If we could get a small team inside to sabotage the cooling systems, the shields would overload and shut down." Morrison frowned. "How would you get inside?" "The place is crawling with Koreth soldiers." Ford smiled grimly. "The same way humans have always gotten into impossible places, sir. We improvise." Her plan was crazy, but it was the kind of crazy that humans specialized in. While the main fleet would attack the Koreth ships to draw their attention, Ford would take a team of 12 special operations soldiers in a captured Koreth shuttle. They would land on the back side of the moon where the sensors were weakest and fight their way to the power core. "It's a one-way mission," Ford told her volunteers as they prepared for the assault. "Even if we succeed, we probably won't make it out alive." Every soldier in her units stepped forward anyway. They had all seen the recordings from the refugee ships, the burned Zelani children, and destroyed cities. Some things were worth dying for. 6 hours later, the battle began. Captain Jim Walsh led his destroyer squadron in the first attack wave, their ships screaming through space toward the Koreth fleet. The enemy responded exactly as expected, turning all their attention to the approaching human warships. "All weapons, fire at will," Walsh ordered as his destroyers opened up with everything they had. Human plasma cannons and missile launchers lit up the darkness as they engaged the larger Koreth vessels. The Koreth ships were bigger and more heavily armed, but the human captains had advantages their enemies didn't expect. Human pilots, trained in the chaotic environments of Earth's atmosphere, could make their ships dance through space in ways that confused the alien gunners. "Use the asteroid field," Walsh called to his squadron as Koreth return fire began to get too close. "Make them chase us through the rocks." The human destroyers dove into the nearby asteroid belt, weaving between massive space rocks, while the heavier Koreth ships struggled to follow. It was like watching motorcycles race through a forest while trucks tried to keep up. While the space battle raged, Major Ford's shuttle approached the dark side of Verdania's moon. The stolen Koreth vessel looked exactly like dozens of others, moving around the fortress, and the enemy sensors ignored it completely. "Landing zone in sight," whispered Sergeant Mike Brown, Ford's demolitions expert. Through the shuttle windows, they could see the massive fortress stretching across the moon's surface. Up close, it was even more terrifying. A metal mountain covered with weapons, and crawling with gray-armored Korath soldiers. Ford's team landed near a maintenance shaft that led into the fortress's lower levels. According to the stolen technical data, this was where the main power systems were located. Getting there would mean fighting through corridors designed to stop any invasion attempt. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight, Ford told her soldiers as they prepared to leave the shuttle. We're here to break things and cause chaos. Hit hard, move fast, and don't give them time to organize. The first Korath patrol they encountered never knew what hit them. Human soldiers, trained in close-quarters combat and armed with weapons designed for brutal efficiency, moved through the fortress corridors like ghosts. The Korath had never faced enemies who fought this way. They're not adapting, observed Corporal Janet Lee as they took down another group of alien soldiers. They keep using the same tactics, even when they don't work. It was true. The Korath were disciplined and well-armed, but they followed strict procedures that assumed their enemies would fight in predictable ways. When humans did something unexpected, the aliens seemed unable to adjust their response. Ford's team reached the power core after 30 minutes of fighting. The massive reactor that powered the fortress shields hummed with energy behind thick protective barriers. But the cooling system that kept it from overheating was more vulnerable. Plant the charges here, here, and here, Ford ordered, pointing to the main coolant lines. When these blow, the whole system will overload in minutes. As her soldiers worked, alarms began blaring throughout the fortress. The Korath had finally figured out that humans were inside their stronghold, and reinforcements were rushing toward the power core. Charges set, reported Brown. 30 seconds to detonation. The corridor outside erupted with gunfire as Korath soldiers tried to blast through the door. Ford's team took cover behind the machinery and prepared for their final stand. It's been an honor serving with you all, Ford said as the countdown timer reached 10 seconds. The explosion that followed shook the entire moon. The fortress shields flickered and died as the cooling system failed and the power core overheated. For the first time since the battle began, the orbital weapon platform was vulnerable. Shields are down, announced Captain Hayes from the Liberty. All ships concentrate fire on the fortress. The human fleet turned their guns on the moon base, pouring fire into the structure that had been terrorizing Verdania. Without its protective shields, the fortress began to crumble under the assault. General Vex Tolar, the Korath commander, watched his impregnable stronghold fall apart around him. In his 40 years of military service, he had conquered 6-star systems and never faced a defeat. Now a handful of humans had destroyed his greatest weapon using tactics he couldn't even understand. How did they get inside? He demanded of his officers that no one had an answer. The humans had done something that should have been impossible, and now the battle was turning against the Korath for the first time in their history. The fortress exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the entire Verdania system. Major Ford and her team were gone, but their sacrifice had broken the enemy's strongest position. The way to Verdania was clear. With the moon fortress destroyed, the human fleet could finally see the full horror of what the Korath had done to Verdania. The planet that had once been covered in beautiful forests and crystal cities was now a wasteland of ash and smoke. But thermal sensors showed that life still existed down there. Zelani, survivors hiding in underground shelters and fighting a desperate battle against their invaders. Colonel Dan Price stood in the landing bay of the troop transport ship Washington, watching as his soldiers prepared for the largest human ground operation in history. 3,000 Marines and Army troops were about to land on an alien world to fight an enemy they had never faced before. "Listen up," Price called to his officers. "The Korath have been on this planet for 2 weeks. They've had time to dig in and set up defensive positions. But they've never fought humans before, and they're about to learn why that was a mistake. The orbital bombardment had stopped with the destruction of the moon base, but the Korath ground forces were still trying to finish what they had started. Intelligence reports showed enemy soldiers systematically destroying every bit of plant life they could find, even burning down individual trees just to cause more suffering. Captain Ruth Clark checked her medical supplies one more time as the transport ships prepared to launch. As the fleet's chief medical officer, she would be setting up field hospitals to treat both human and Zelani wounded. The problem was that human medicine had never been tested on plant-based aliens before. "Doctor, incoming transmission from the planet's surface," announced the communications officer. "It's coming from underground." The voice that came through was weak but determined. "Human ships, this is Prime Minister Kylaresh of the Zelani Republic. We are still here. We are still fighting. Please hurry." Clark felt her heart racing. She had met Kylaresh during the agricultural exchange program 3 years ago. He was a gentle scholar who had devoted his life to growing things, not destroying them. The fact that he was now leading an underground resistance showed just how desperate things had become. "Prime Minister, this is Colonel Price. We're coming. Down now. Can you guide us to safe landing zones?" "Yes, Colonel, but be careful. The Korath have sensors that can detect movement from orbit. They will know you are coming before you land." Price smiled grimly. "Let them know. Maybe it will give them time to surrender." The first wave of human landing craft dropped through Verdania's atmosphere like meteors, their heat shields glowing as they plunged toward the surface. Korath anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately, but the human pilots had trained for this. They scattered their ships across the sky, making it impossible for the enemy to concentrate their fire on any single target. Lieutenant Sam Wilson felt his transport ship shake as enemy weapons exploded around it. Through the small window, he could see the devastated landscape of Verdania rushing up to meet them. What had once been a forest paradise now looked like pictures of Earth after a nuclear war. 30 seconds to touchdown, called the pilot. "Hold on back there." The landing was rough, but Wilson's squad was ready for it. As soon as the ship's doors opened, they poured out into the gray landscape of the former Zelani capital. The air smelled of smoke and death, and the sky was dark with ash clouds that blocked out the sun. "Contact front," shouted Sergeant Lisa Adams as Korath soldiers appeared from behind the ruins of what had been a beautiful crystal tower. The enemy aliens were tall and covered in gray armor that made them look like metal insects. Their weapons fired bolts of red energy that turned anything they hit into vapor. But human soldiers had advantages that the Korath didn't expect. Earth's chaotic environments had trained them to fight in any conditions: cities, forests, mountains, deserts. Verdania's ruined landscape was just another battlefield to adapt to. "Use the rubble for cover," Wilson ordered as his squad spread out among the debris. "Don't let them pin us down in one place." The firefight that followed showed the difference between human and Korath military thinking. The aliens stood in formation and fired in coordinated volleys, just like they had been trained to do. But humans moved like water, flowing around obstacles and attacking from unexpected directions. Within an hour, Price's forces had secured 3 landing zones and were pushing toward the underground shelters where Zelani civilians were hiding. The resistance they met was fierce but predictable. The Korath used the same tactics over and over, even when those tactics weren't working. "They're not learning from their mistakes," observed Captain Mike Rogers as his company cleared another enemy position. "Every time we outflank them, they respond the same way." It was true. The Korath were skilled and disciplined, but they seemed unable to adapt when their standard procedures failed. Human soldiers, trained to think for themselves and improvise solutions. found it almost easy to outmaneuver them. The real breakthrough came when Price's forces made contact with the Zalani resistance. Prime Minister Kyler Esch emerged from a hidden bunker deep beneath the ruins of Harmony Grove, the former capital city. He was thin, and his bark-like skin was scarred, but his eyes still held the wisdom and kindness that had made humans trust his people from their first meeting. "Colonel Price," Kyler Esch said with obvious relief. "We had given up hope. The Korath said no one would come to help plant-eaters like us." "The Korath were wrong about a lot of things," Price replied. "Where do you need us most?" "The Zalani?" Leader led them to a hidden command center where surviving military officers had been coordinating the resistance. The situation was grim. Most of the planet's surface had been stripped bare, and thousands of Korath soldiers still occupied key positions throughout the former cities. "They have been methodical," explained General Varenka, the highest-ranking Zalani military officer to survive the invasion. "First they destroyed our spaceports and communication centers. Then they began burning the forests, starting with the nurseries where our children grow. They wanted to break our spirit before, killing our bodies." Captain Clark arrived at the underground base and immediately began setting up medical facilities. What she found there made her angry in a way she had never experienced before. Zalani children, some barely old enough to walk, had been deliberately targeted by Korath weapons. Urns covered their small bodies where energy bolts had been aimed, specifically to cause maximum pain without immediate death. "This isn't war," Clark said as she worked to save a young Zalani whose leaves had been burned away. "This is torture on a planetary scale." But human medicine, combined with Zalani knowledge of their own biology, began to work miracles. Clark's team developed new treatments that helped plant-based physiology heal from energy weapon damage. Within hours, Zalani who had been dying were sitting up and asking to rejoin the fight as night fell over the devastated world. Human and Zalani forces began coordinated attacks on Korath positions. The humans provided the military expertise and firepower, while the Zalani offered knowledge of the terrain and hidden paths through the ruins. "They're falling back toward the starport," reported Captain Rogers, as his scouts observed enemy movements. "Looks like they're trying to evacuate." Price smiled as he coordinated the final assault. The Korath had come to Verdania, expecting an easy victory over a peaceful species. Instead, they had found themselves fighting a two-front war against enemies who refused to follow the rules of conventional combat. "All units, prepare for the final push," Price ordered. "Let's send these bullies home with a message they'll never forget." As human and Zalani soldiers advanced together through the ruins of Harmony Grove, something beautiful happened. In areas where the fighting had stopped, tiny green shoots began pushing up through the ash. The planet was already trying to heal itself, just like its people. The liberation of Verdania was almost complete. But the Korath Empire was not finished yet. Intelligence reports showed that their main fleet was approaching, bringing enough firepower to glass the entire planet. The real test was still ahead. The warning came from the deep space sensors, just as the last Korath soldiers were surrendering on Verdania's surface. Captain Lisa Stone stared at her tactical display in disbelief as red dots filled the screen. The main Korath fleet was approaching. Over 150 warships, led by their newest and most powerful vessels. "Admiral Morrison to all ships," came the urgent transmission from the flagship. "We have incoming hostiles. 3 times our number and closing fast. All units, prepare for combat." Admiral Jack Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him as he studied the enemy formation. The Korath fleet was massive, disciplined, and led by Supreme Commander Zal-Korath himself, the alien general who had never lost a battle in 30 years of conquest. "Sir, they're sending us a message," announced the communications officer aboard Morrison's flagship. The face that appeared on the main screen was unlike anything the humans had seen before. Supreme Commander Zal-Korath looked like a giant gray mantis with compound eyes that glowed red and mandibles that clicked as he spoke. "Human insects," Zal-Korath said in perfect English. "You have made a grave mistake interfering with Korath justice. We offer you one chance to surrender. Leave this system immediately, and we will kill you quickly. Stay, and we will make your deaths last for days." Morrison stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "Supreme Commander, this is Admiral Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet. We don't abandon our friends, and we don't surrender to bullies. If you want a fight, you've got one." The alien commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Foolish mammals, you are outnumbered 3-1. Your primitive ships cannot stand against Korath engineering. We will crush you like the insects you are." As the transmission ended, Morrison turned to his tactical officer. "Captain Stone, what's our situation?" Stone's fingers flew over her console as she analyzed the approaching enemy fleet. "They're using standard Korath battle formation, sir. Heavy ships in the center, medium vessels on the flanks, escorts providing screening. It's the same formation they've used to conquer 6 star systems. And that might be their weakness," Morrison realized. "They expect us to meet them head-on in traditional formation combat. But humans don't fight traditional battles." The Admiral opened a channel to all ships in the human fleet. "All captains, listen carefully. We're about to face overwhelming odds, but we have something they don't: the ability to adapt and improvise. Forget everything you know about fleet combat doctrine. We're going to fight this like Earth pirates, not like a formal navy." Captain Ben Hayes, aboard the Liberty, understood immediately. Human naval history was full of smaller forces defeating larger ones through superior tactics and willingness to take risks. From ancient sea battles to modern conflicts, humans had always found ways to win when the odds were against them. "Break formation," Morrison ordered. "All ships scatter and attack independently. Use the asteroid field. Use hit-and-run tactics. Use anything that makes it hard for them to coordinate their fire. Make them chase us through terrain that favors smaller, more maneuverable ships." The Korath fleet approached in perfect formation, expecting the humans to meet them in the traditional way, battle line against battle line, with the larger force grinding down the smaller one through superior firepower. Instead, they found empty space where the human fleet should have been. Where did they go? Demanded Supreme Commander Zal-Korath, as his sensors showed the human ships spreading out in all directions. The answer came in the form of surprise attacks from multiple directions. Captain Su Kin's destroyer Ranger emerged from behind a large asteroid and fired all her missiles at a Korath heavy cruiser before disappearing back into the rock field. Captain Jim Walsh's squadron hit the enemy flanks and then scattered before the Korath could respond effectively. "They're not fighting properly," complained General Vex Tolar, who had survived the destruction of the Moon Fortress. "This is not how space battles are conducted." But that was exactly the point. Humans had learned warfare in environments where following the rules meant death. Earth's chaotic conditions had taught them to fight dirty, to use terrain to their advantage, and to never give the enemy what they expected. The turning point came when Captain Stone discovered something crucial about Korath fleet communications. While monitoring enemy transmissions, she noticed that all their ships used the same communication frequencies and encryption codes. "Admiral, their entire fleet is networked together," Stone reported excitedly. "Every ship receives orders through the same communication system. If we could hack into that network," Morrison's eyes lit up, "we could turn their coordination against them." "Do it." Stone and her cyber warfare team went to work immediately. Human-computer technology, developed in Earth's competitive environment where hackers constantly battled security systems, proved more adaptable than Korath military networks designed for rigid hierarchical control. "I'm in," Stone announced 20 minutes later. "I can access their communication system, but I'll need time to figure out how to use it effectively." Outside, the battle continued to rage. Human ships darted in and out of the asteroid field, striking at the larger Korath vessels and then vanishing before the enemy could respond. The aliens were becoming frustrated, as their superior numbers meant nothing when they couldn't bring their firepower to bear effectively. "This is impossible," Zal-Korath snarled as another of his ships reported damage from a human attack that seemed to come from nowhere. How are they everywhere at once? His tactical officers had no answer. The Korath military doctrine was based on overwhelming force applied in coordinated strikes. They had never faced an enemy that refused to stand still and fight properly. Then Stone's cyber attack began to take effect. At first, it was subtle. A few Korath ships received conflicting orders and hesitated. Then it became more obvious. As ships began firing on their own allies, convinced they were attacking human vessels. "What is happening?" demanded Zal-Korath, as his perfect formation dissolved into chaos. That the human cyber warfare specialist had done something brilliant. Instead of trying to shut down the Korath communication system, she had fed false information into it. Ships were being told that their allies were actually enemy vessels in disguise. The more the Korath commanders tried to restore order, the more confused their forces became. "All ships, press the attack," Morrison ordered as he saw the enemy formation falling apart. "Hit them while they're confused." The human fleet emerged from the asteroid field like avenging angels, their weapons blazing as they struck at the disorganized Korath ships. Without their coordination advantage, the alien vessels found themselves fighting individually against enemies who specialized in chaotic combat. Supreme, Commander Zal-Korath watched his mighty fleet dissolve into scattered groups of ships fighting, desperately just to survive. In 30 years of conquest, he had never imagined that a smaller force could defeat him using tactics he couldn't even understand. "Retreat," he finally ordered, his voice hollow with disbelief. "All ships, withdraw to the outer system." But Morrison wasn't finished. "All ships, pursue and harass. Don't let them regroup." The human fleet chased the retreating Korath forces all the way to the edge of the star system, striking at any ship that tried to stop and rally the others. By the time the aliens escaped into jump space, they had lost over half their fleet, and their reputation for invincibility died as the last Korath ship disappeared. Morrison opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All ships, well done. We've sent a message that will echo throughout the galaxy. Humanity protects its friends." Down on Verdania's surface, green shoots were already pushing through the ash as Ilani and human medics worked together to heal the wounded. The planet would recover, its people would rebuild, and the friendship between species would grow stronger than ever. But more importantly, word of the human victory spread quickly through galactic communication networks. Other peaceful species, long terrorized by the Korath Empire, began to hope that someone had finally stood up to the bullies. And in the halls of power throughout the galaxy, alien leaders began to ask a simple question. Who are these humans? And how do we become their allies? The age of human influence in galactic affairs had begun, built on a foundation of loyalty, courage, and the willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves.